Is this the ultimate one lens setup for shooting real estate video? Here are my thoughts on having used the Panasonic Leica 10-25 f1.7 lens. Hi, I'm Grant, and I know it's a bold claim talking about the ultimate lens or ultimate one lens system for shooting real estate styles of video, because of course it depends on what camera system you use, what other lenses you have, and what style of video you shoot. However, this lens comes very close to me for shooting real estate styles of video using my Panasonic GH5. This beastie is the fairly new lens with the fairly long name of Panasonic Leica DG Vario Sumilux 10-25 f1.7 ASPH lens. Panasonic New Zealand very kindly lent me this lens so I can give it a try for shooting real estate video. This lens is a high quality weather sealed lens for the micro 4/3 camera systems such as my Panasonic GH5. To me, the two most impressive things about this lens that stand out, and is the reason why I was really keen to get my hands on one to have a go with, is its obviously constant aperture, very fast constant aperture f1.7 through the whole zoom range, and of course that zoom range of 10-25, which in full frame 35mm equivalent is 20 to 50 millimeters. That 35mm zoom range of 20 to 50 millimeters is actually a really nice zoom range when you're shooting real estate videos. That zoom range is also a fantastic zoom range for general purpose wide to mid-range zoom styles of shooting. This lens could quite literally be a one lens system for many different styles and types of video projects. It is a large piece of glass, especially when you compare it to my Panasonic Leica 8-18, which I currently use for shooting real estate video. However, the size is not a bad thing. It is actually a really nice, wide and chunky style of lens to put in your hand. I had a chance to use this lens handheld just around my local town and area, and it is actually a very nice balance and a really nice size that sits in the palm of your hand. When I was shooting with this lens combination on my Panasonic GH5, you knew you had a camera and lens in your hand, and it definitely wasn't a small, fiddly setup which sometimes you get with the smaller style of cameras. Also in the camera world, and especially if you do a lot of handheld shooting, weight is often stability. Speaking of stability, this 10-25 lens doesn't have built-in image stabilization like my Panasonic Leica 8-18. However, with the GH5 that I was using with its in-body stabilization, I had no problems hand-holding and shooting with this lens, even on the long end of the zoom. One of the other selling features of this lens that the marketing department in Panasonic will let you know of is that it has a stepless or declicked lens aperture ring, so you can basically do manual aperture pulls without that annoying click 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 and jumps and exposure that you use if you're using a dial on your camera like most small mirrorless and DSLR cameras do. You will find this, and those of you that have done a lot of shooting perhaps in interview situations, even like this one here, when you've got to make a tiny aperture change, say for example if the sun comes out, you can do this very smoothly with a proper aperture ring such as on this lens, as opposed to this lens where you're going to see quite an abrupt exposure jump as I click through the different ranges on the iris. So the ability to make small and smooth aperture changes on the fly whilst shooting will be a definite appeal to certain styles and certain types of people out there shooting video. Now there's people out there that are a lot better at pixel peeping than I am, but the image quality coming out of this lens is of course, or as I expected it to be, very good. And even when putting it side by side with this lens, I couldn't really pick a whole lot of difference. However, the areas that I did pick a bit of difference is I could open up the aperture, obviously because I have a constant f1.7, even on the long end of the zoom on this lens, I could open it up at 1.7, whereas the long end of this lens is f4. So if you're after that shallow depth of field or a constant shallow depth of field, then that is a fantastic lens for doing that. This one, or my Panasonic Leica 8-18, not so great. So most importantly, how was the lens to use? And I had the chance to use this lens on an actual paid real estate video shoot, and so it was a fantastic time to test it and put it through its paces. As expected, it was very nice to use, and I loved having the large diameter controls for zoom, focus and aperture, which are all very nice to use in your hand. Bigger lenses and bigger controls in the video world are often a lot nicer to use because you have a lot more control or fine control on the lenses, and they just feel a lot more positive in the hand. And that's why you will see on the very high-end lenses in the professional video and film world, lenses aren't small, they're all still big and they all still have large controls that are good for the operators to use. The 10 to 25 or 20 to 50 millimeter full frame zoom range was, as expected, very nice to use and very convenient to use when shooting my real estate video job. I sat on the 10 mil or the very wide end of the lens for most of my interior shots, and then switched it up or zoomed into the 25 mil end for picking up close up detail. And again, as I mentioned earlier, even on the 25 mil end or the zoomed in end of the lens, you still have the opportunity to use an f1.7 to get that lovely soft depth of field if you're picking up detail shots. And also, as I alluded to before, even if I was trying to pull a detail shot with my Panasonic Leica 8 to 18, on the zoomed in 18 mil end of the zoom, I can only open it up to an f4, which is fine for most things, but this lens is almost a stop and a half faster. A couple of things that you may need to be aware of if you're considering this lens is that due to its larger size and weight, and if you're shooting predominantly on a handheld gimbal, you will need to check that your camera and lens weight, or that your gimbal still handles your camera and lens combined weight. And I also found that when I was trying to balance my GH5 and this lens on my Moser Air gimbal, because of the forward weight of that lens, I had to put the camera right back and it was almost hitting at the back of the gimbal, so I was almost unable to balance it, but I did get it, but only just. Also be aware that this lens barrel does move in and out when zooming, and that will change your balance if using on a handheld gimbal, but that is common to a lot of the lenses that we use these days. Those problems aren't really a deal breaker for me though. In an ideal world, I would have actually liked to have seen the wide end of this lens, being the 10 mil, even another mil or two wider, such as 8 or 9 millimeters. The wide end at 10 is, as I keep mentioning, is the equivalent of 20 mils on a full frame equivalent. And often when you're shooting real estate lenses such as this, I can actually go to a 8 or 9 mil, which is even wider, and that often will help you out in very small spaces. So a fraction wider would be fantastic, but I am being very niggly there. My go-to full frame rate for shooting real estate video interiors is generally in the 18 to 20 millimeter area. Now, the cost of this very fast and beautifully made lens is not cheap. At the time of recording this video, it comes in at US $1,797 or New Zealand $3,190. Compare that to my Panasonic Leica 8 to 18 wide lens, and that's not a cheap lens either. That comes in at US $998 or New Zealand $1698. That lens is almost double the price of my existing 8 to 18 lens and is actually more expensive than the Panasonic GH5 body only. So would I trade up from my existing Panasonic 8 to 18 lens to the newer 10 to 25 millimeter lens, and is it the ultimate lens for shooting real estate video? No, and arguably yes. No, I wouldn't sell my existing 8 to 18 lens and trade it up to the 10 to 25 lens. The price just doesn't justify it for shooting the style of real estate videos that I do. However, if price was not even a factor and someone said to me, you can only pick one lens for shooting real estate video for your Panasonic GH5, then I would have no hesitation in choosing this 10 to 25 lens. To me, this lens is aimed at the more serious video professional, perhaps a doco shooter or someone wanting the best mid-range or the wide to mid-range zoom lens that money can currently buy for the Micro Four Thirds camera system. That is of course my opinion, so if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe if you aren't already, and thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next one.